The city of Neo-Kyoto hummed with a million digital heartbeats. It was a place of towering chrome spires and holographic advertisements that painted the perpetual twilight. But in his small room, amidst a tangled nest of wires and glowing monitors, Kaito heard a different kind of pulse. It was faint, almost a whisper, hiding beneath the city's roar. For months he had been sifting through the forgotten corners of the net, searching for a ghost. His brother Kenji had vanished 2 years ago. The official report said he ran away. Kaito knew better. He felt his brother's absence like a missing limb, a constant dull ache that technology could not soothe. One night, the ache sharpened into a signal. It was a distorted burst of audio, buried deep within a secure government channel he'd spent weeks trying to crack. He isolated the frequency, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The sound was mostly static, a harsh crackling hiss. But beneath it, for just a moment, he heard it, a voice. It was warped, stretched thin like old tape, but it was unmistakable. Kaito, find the rift! The words were a phantom touch, a memory-given sound. It was Kenji's voice. The air in Kaito's room grew cold and heavy, as if the past itself had just stepped through the walls. He played the recording again and again. Each time, the same 3 words clawed their way out of the digital noise. Find the rift. What was the rift? A place? A code? A warning? The message was a breadcrumb, the first one he'd found in 2 long, silent years. It was a dangerous clue, wrapped in government encryption and broadcast from a place that did not want to be found, but it was also a spark of hope in the suffocating darkness of his grief. This was more than just a random signal. It was a deliberate message, a call for help. The discovery changed everything. Before, his hacking had been a distraction, a way to numb the pain. Now, it had a purpose. He began to dig deeper, cross-referencing the signal's origin with city schematics and old public records. The search led him down a rabbit hole of redacted files and classified projects. He felt a familiar thrill, the kind he and Kenji used to share when they would bypass the school's network's filters. But this was different. This was not a game. This was a rescue mission, and he was diving headfirst into waters far deeper and darker than he could ever have imagined. Kaito was no longer just looking for a ghost, he was hunting it. Kaito knew he could not follow this trail alone. The message was a key, but the lock was buried somewhere in the vast, uncaring city. He needed his friends. First, there was Rin, a gifted engineer who could coax life from dead machinery with a soldering iron and a stubborn glare. Her workshop was a chaotic symphony of spare parts and half-finished inventions. Then there was Sora, the group's archivist. He saw patterns in the noise, connections that everyone else missed. His memory was a library of Neo-Kyoto secrets, filled with forgotten news articles and whispered rumors. Kaito brought them the recording, the static-laced voice of his lost brother. They gathered in the back of Rin's workshop, the air thick with the smell of ozone and metal. Sora listened to the audio, his eyes closed in concentration, while Rin ran diagnostics on the signal's strange properties. The decay is unnatural, she murmured, pointing at a jagged line on her screen. It's like the data itself is falling apart. Sora's eyes snapped open. People have been disappearing, he said, his voice low. Not just runaways, quietly. One day they are here. The next their digital footprints are being wiped clean, their apartments emptied. It's like they're being edited out of the city. The team started their investigation. Sora pulled up old city records, encrypted police reports, and forum posts from the dark web. He found a disturbing trend. The disappearances were clustered around the city's older, abandoned districts. These were places the gleaming new Neo-Kyoto had left behind, areas of urban decay and forgotten history. Each missing person had one thing in common. They were all classified as having severe anxiety disorders or chronic phobias. It was a strange, unsettling detail. Why would that matter? Why them? The official story was always the same. They moved away. They sought treatment. They simply left. Kaito felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He remembered Kenji's panic attacks, how his older brother had been terrified of small enclosed spaces. It was something their family never spoke about, a shadow they all pretended not to see. Was that the connection? Was Kenji's disappearance linked to these other vanishing faces? The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was a monstrous one, its shape still hidden in the shadows. The city felt less like a home and more like a hunting ground, and they were beginning to understand that something was stalking its most vulnerable residents. Sora's research pointed them to a single ominous location, Sector 7G. It was an old military base on the outskirts of Neo-Kyoto, decommissioned decades ago after a so-called containment failure. The official records were heavily censored, the details lost to time and bureaucracy. But the signal from Kenji's message, faint as it was, had originated from somewhere deep within its decaying perimeter. The place was a concrete tomb, surrounded by high fences topped with rusted barbed wire. Warning signs, faded by sun and acid rain, promised lethal force against trespassers. It was a place the city wanted everyone to forget. Getting inside was the first test of their combined skills. Rin disabled the perimeter's ancient electronic surveillance, her fingers a blur as she bypassed one security layer after another. Sora guided them through the labyrinthine complex using a blueprint he'd unearthed from a deleted municipal server. Kaito handled the physical locks, his slender tools moving with a practiced delicacy. The air inside the base was stale and cold, smelling of damp concrete and dust. Every sound echoed in the oppressive silence. The drip of water, the scuttling of unseen things, the frantic beat of their own hearts. They moved deeper into the facility, their torch beams cutting through the gloom. The base was a maze of corridors and empty laboratories. Desks were overturned, papers were scattered across the floor like dead leaves, and strange dark stains marked the walls. It felt like a place that had been evacuated in a great hurry. There was a sense of profound wrongness here, a lingering echo of panic. Kaito felt it most acutely. The narrow hallways seemed to press in on him, reminding him of Kenji's claustrophobia. He felt a phantom fear that wasn't his own, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. They finally found the source of the signal in a vast, subterranean chamber. It was a huge circular room that looked like a hangar for something that was never meant to fly. In the center stood a colossal metal ring, easily 20 meters high. It was covered in strange non-human symbols and thick cables that snaked across the floor like dead serpents. The structure pulsed with a low, almost subsonic hum that they could feel in their bones. This was it. This had to be the rift. It was a machine, a gateway, a wound in the world, and it was waiting. As they approached the silent, monolithic ring, the air began to shimmer. The humming grew louder, vibrating not just in their chests, but in their minds. Kaito felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. Then, from the center of the ring, something began to emerge. It wasn't solid, not at first. It looked like heat haze, a distortion in the air. But it slowly coalesced, taking on a form that was both fluid and nightmarish. It was a creature made of shadow and flickering light, its shape constantly shifting. It had too many limbs, all of them ending in sharp, spindly claws. The creature let out a sound that was not a roar, but a symphony of terror. It was the screech of scraping metal, the whisper of a panicked voice, and the sound of a heart beating too fast. All at once, Kaito stared, frozen, as the thing's form momentarily sharpened. For a split second, he saw the terrified face of a man from one of Sora's missing person files. The creature was an echo, a physical manifestation of fear. It was a living nightmare, torn from a person's psyche and given monstrous form. The base wasn't just abandoned, it was a cage, and something had broken the lock. Panic erupted. The echo lunged, its movements unnaturally fast. Rin reacted first, grabbing a heavy-duty power cable from the floor and swinging it like a whip. It cracked against the creature's flank, and the echo shrieked, dissolving into static for a moment before reforming. Its shadowy form seemed to feed on their fear, growing more solid, more defined. Sora shouted, "Its form is unstable, it's reacting to us." He was right. Kaito could feel his own rising terror giving the monster strength, sharpening its claws, deepening its shadows. His fear was its food. They scrambled back, retreating through the dark corridors they had just navigated. The creature pursued them, its distorted screams echoing through the concrete maze. It was a relentless hunter, an embodiment of the very dread that filled the air. They barely made it out, sealing a heavy blast door behind them, just as the echo slammed against it from the other side. They collapsed against the cold steel, gasping for breath, their minds reeling. They had found the rift, but they had also found what came through it. The missing people weren't just gone. They had been used as fuel, their deepest fears turned into monsters. Shaken but alive, the team retreated to the safety of Rin's workshop. The encounter with the echo had changed everything. This was no longer just about finding Kenji. It was about a threat that could unravel their entire city. Sora, driven by a new and terrifying urgency, dug deeper into the government servers. He used fragments of code he'd copied from a terminal inside the Sector 7G base, using them as a key. What he unlocked was the truth, and it was more horrifying than any monster. He found the files for a top-secret program, Project Chimera. Project Chimera was the government's attempt to weaponize fear. The documents detailed the construction of the Rift, a stable gateway to an alternate dimension they had named the Echoverse. This other world was a psychic plane, a dimension where thoughts and emotions, particularly fear, had physical substance. The scientists behind the project believed they could extract this raw emotional energy and use it. They theorized they could create soldiers who felt no fear, or psychological weapons that could incapacitate entire populations with terror. It was a project born from arrogance and a terrifying lack of morality. The project had gone horribly wrong. The initial test subjects, volunteers from the military, were driven mad. The scientists then turned to civilians, secretly abducting people who suffered from intense, specific phobias. They believed these powerful, focused fears would be easier to control and harvest. These were the missing people. They were not just fuel, they were templates. Their minds were used as molds to create the echoes, living weapons of terror, but the creatures were uncontrollable. They were pure predatory instinct. The containment failure at Sector 7G wasn't an accident, it was an outbreak. The government had covered it all up. They buried the project, silenced the scientists, and erased the victims from public record. But they hadn't been able to shut down the rift. It remained active, a slow leak between worlds. The Echoverse was bleeding into their reality, drawn by the ambient fear of a sprawling metropolis like Neo Kyoto. The occasional disappearances were the government's desperate attempts to manage the leak, feeding the rift just enough to keep it from exploding. They were sacrificing citizens to maintain a fragile secret peace, and Kaito's brother Kenji had been one of them. The knowledge of Project Chimera cast a dark shadow over the group. The danger was no longer confined to the abandoned base. The barrier between worlds was weakening, and the echoes were beginning to slip through the cracks into Neo-Kyoto itself. The monsters they faced were no longer random, they were personal. The Echoverse was a mirror, reflecting their own deepest anxieties back at them. Their fears were becoming real, tangible threats that hunted them through the neon-drenched streets of the city they were trying to protect. Each of them had to confront a demon of their own making. For Rin, it was a fear of failure. She had always been defined by her ability to build and fix things. Her nightmare took the form of a creature made of rusted, broken machinery. It was a clanking, grinding horror that fell apart and reassembled itself with every step, its metallic shrieks sounding like her own frustrated cries. It relentlessly dismantled every piece of technology she tried to use against it, turning her greatest strength into a source of helplessness. The creature was a manifestation of her deepest insecurity, the terror that, when it truly mattered, her skills would not be enough to save the people she cared about. Sora's fear was of being forgotten, of being invisible. He spent his life archiving the stories of others, terrified that his own would never be told. His echo was a silent, shifting thing made of fading ink and whispering paper. It had no face, and it moved through the city without leaving a trace. It would erase street signs, change building numbers, and alter digital maps, trying to isolate him, to make him lost and unknown. It was a subtle psychological horror, a monster that attacked his sense of place and identity, threatening to wipe him away just like the missing people he had tried so hard to remember. Kaito's fear was the most immediate and painful. His echo was born from his guilt and grief over Kenji. It took the form of a shadowy doppelganger of his brother, but with hollow eyes and a voice that twisted his fondest memories into accusations. "You left me," it would whisper from dark alleys. "You weren't fast enough." This creature haunted his steps, a constant walking reminder of his failure. It was the personification of his grief, a monster made from love and loss. To fight it was to fight his own memories, to battle the very ghost he had set out to find in the first place. Facing their own personal nightmares, the friends could have easily been broken apart. The echoes were designed to isolate, to feed on individual terror until there was nothing left. Yet it was this shared trial by fire that forged their friendship into something stronger than steel. They realized they could not defeat their own demons alone. The creatures were too personal, too perfectly crafted to exploit their individual weaknesses. Their survival depended not on individual strength, but on their trust in one another. They had to fight, not just for themselves, but for each other. Their teamwork became their greatest weapon. They learned to stand in the path of a nightmare that was not their own. Kaito, despite being haunted by the phantom of his brother, would stand with Rin against the clanking machine monster. He would use his agility to create distractions, drawing the creature's attention while Rin worked on a way to disable it, her focus restored by his presence. She was not alone in her fear of failure, because he was there to catch her if she fell. Her confidence returned, not because the fear was gone, but because the burden of it was shared. In the same way, Rin and Kaito would help Sora fight his faceless echo. The creature sought to erase him, to make him invisible, so they made him seen. They would call out his name, repeat his findings, and rely on his knowledge, anchoring him to reality. Rin would rig up devices that would flicker and short out in the monster's presence, making the invisible visible. They became his witnesses, proving his existence in a world the echo tried to deny. They refused to let him be forgotten, their voices a shield against the monster's silencing whispers. And when Kaito was paralyzed by the sight of his brother's accusing ghost, Sora and Rin would step in front of him. They couldn't see the monster as he did, but they could see its effect on their friend. Sora would recite facts, real memories of Kenji, funny stories, shared triumphs, countering the echo's poisonous lies with the truth. Rin would physically pull Kaito back, grounding him in the present moment. They reminded him that the creature was not his brother. It was a perversion of his memory, and by standing together, they could defy it. Their friendship became a light, pushing back the shadows. Their journey led them back to where it all began, the subterranean chamber in Sector 7G. They had a plan, pieced together from Rin's engineering genius and Sora's analysis of the Project Chimera files. They couldn't destroy the rift. The resulting explosion of energy would tear Neo-Kyoto apart. But Rin believed she could reverse its polarity. Instead of pulling things out of the Echoverse, it would push them back in. It was a risky, desperate gambit. They had to get close to the portal, the very heart of the nightmare, and hold off the echoes long enough for Rin to work. As they reached the chamber, the rift roared to life. It was no longer a quiet hum, but a raging vortex of psychic energy. Echoes poured out, a tide of manifested fear. At the center of the storm, standing before the portal, was a figure. It was Kenji, not the shadowy echo that had haunted Kaito, but his actual brother, pale and thin, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed ancient. He was the anchor, the core battery for the rift. His profound claustrophobia, amplified by the machine, was the primary signal that kept the gateway open. The government hadn't just used him, they had made him the lock. A voice crackled over the base's old comm system. It was a government official, a shadowy figure from Project Chimera, who had been monitoring them. "Stand down," the voice commanded, cold and emotionless. "The boy is a necessary sacrifice. Closing the rift now, with him as the focal point, will create a paradox. It might destroy the Echoverse, but the feedback loop will shatter our reality as well. You will trade one apocalypse for another." They were presented with an impossible choice: save Kenji and risk destroying their own world, or sacrifice him to maintain the fragile, horrifying balance. Kaito looked at his brother, trapped between worlds, a prisoner of his own mind. He looked at his friends, ready to fight and die for him, and he looked at the city he called home, humming with millions of lives, all of them oblivious to the abyss yawning beneath them. The choice fell to him. Rin could initiate the reversal, but Kaito had to sever the connection. He had to break the psychic link to his brother. Doing so might save Kenji, pulling him back through the portal before it closed, or it might kill him instantly. Leaving him there would condemn him to an eternity of torment, but it might save everyone else. His journey to find his brother had led him to this single, heart-stopping moment. In the final screaming moments, with reality groaning under the strain, Kaito made his choice. He would not sacrifice his brother. He would not become the monsters he was fighting. He lunged for the console, his fingers flying in a desperate sequence that would sever the connection and pull Kenji back. He chose family. He chose hope. The world could face the consequences. As the rift imploded, collapsing in on itself with a flash of silent white light, Kaito saw his brother stumble forward, free. But something was wrong. Another memory surfaced in Kaito's mind, one he had long suppressed. It was a memory of an accident from their childhood, a fall, a head injury, a long hospital stay. Doctors had said Kaito was lucky to have recovered with no lasting effects. But as the rift's energy washed over him, he remembered it differently. He remembered not recovering. He remembered the darkness. He remembered Kenji, desperate and grieving, making a deal with shadowy people in suits who promised they could bring him back. They had a new, experimental technology, a way to map a consciousness, a way to rebuild a broken mind. They had saved him, but at what cost? Was he truly Kaito? Or was he a copy, a ghost rebuilt by the same technology that created the rift? Was his search for Kenji driven by brotherly love, or was it the machine calling to its source code? The lines between his identity, his memories, and the Echoverse blurred into an indistinguishable haze. He had saved his brother, but in doing so, he may have discovered that he himself was the first ghost in the machine, a product of the very project that had torn their lives apart. His entire existence was now a question mark. The rift was closed. The echoes were gone for now. Neo Kyoto was safe. But a new, more terrifying question lingered in the silent chamber. If Kaito was a construct, a piece of the Echoverse given flesh and blood, was the gateway truly sealed, or had he just locked himself on the wrong side? The city was saved from the monsters without, but a new uncertainty had been born within its savior. The future of Neo Kyoto, and of Kaito himself, was now an unknown variable, a story waiting to be written in the static between worlds.